Okay, we are live and we're just getting a few problems there with the screen. We'll just get that started. We'll get some viewers on in a moment. This is a very, very important, urgent update coming out of China. And of course, you've got the G7 summit that is going on right now. And it's the response from China that's going to blow you away. We have got a situation where the West is meeting for the G7 summit, and these countries, I'll remind everyone again, is the United States, the UK, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And these Western countries are forming a bloc and an alliance to first of all introduce sanctions or further sanctions against Russia. And therefore, they are also talking about China. And the quote was to stop the economic coercion of China. What does that mean? Well, it's certainly got Chinese nose out of joint, and the response, as we're going to read to you in a moment, as Simon joins me for this quick update, is that China is not having a bar of it, and in fact have retaliated in a very, very strong way, but also holding the higher ground. For the details, let's bring Simon in. This is truly a big day, Simon.
Hi there, Jason. Yes, exactly as we were forecasting for the last few weeks, this weekend has turned out to be extremely significant. And we're going to have to look back at the C5 in a moment. But first of all, we're going to deal with the G7 and the Chinese response to that. They're really not happy about having their parade rained upon at all. We are seeing specific escalation management that we can discuss. And so without further ado, I would just ask people to listen closely as I'm going to read out the final paragraph of a very long statement from the press spokesman of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thanks, Simon. I've just put the full remarks on the screen now, but we're going to highlight now the final paragraph that you're going to read for us. Here it is.
Yeah. So this gentleman said, in response to a specific question, asking him how China felt about the G7 leaders' communique that dedicated 2 full pages and 20 named references to attacking China. Okay. So at the end of this 900-word response, this is what he said. Let me make it clear that gone are the days when a handful of Western countries can just willfully meddle in other countries' internal affairs and manipulate global affairs. We urge G7 members to catch up with the trend of the times, focus on addressing the various issues they have at home, stop ganging up to form exclusive blocs, stop containing and bludgeoning other countries, stop creating and stoking bloc confrontation, and get back to the right path of dialogue and cooperation.
Simon, this is truly an extraordinary comment from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson in a direct response to what's come out of the G7. This is not Palestine making a comment against Israel. This is China making a comment against a bloc of the 7 most powerful Western nations that were once the powerhouse of the planet that no longer are. They no longer have the control of the landmass, the population, or the GDP. This is truly a significant moment. Do you think this is a flare-up towards perhaps that this may go to actual conflict, actual war?
Well, we have to bear in mind that specifically in relation to Taiwan, China on many occasions has made very militaristic threats and then backed down. But I would compare this situation to the life expectancy of a turkey from a turkey's point of view. And to explain that graphic, that's a very, very steady upward sloping diagonal line until the day before Thanksgiving, where it suddenly plummets to zero.
Yes. Well said.
And that is the G7 literally being turkeys voting for Thanksgiving or for Christmas in the Australian or British context. So they are really, really sticking their necks out. Now, von der Leyen is happy because it would appear that her policy has been accepted, and that is not decoupling, but de-risking. And that is specifically in the G7 communique. It's basically paragraphs 51 and 52 of the G7 leaders communique. I'll put a link to the full communique in English. The best version has just been put out a few hours ago by the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's very user-friendly. So I'll link that. And then we'll also put in the link to the full statement from the Chinese Ministry of Affairs that people can read at their leisure. I say it's 900 words, but that's like 2 typed pages. It doesn't take that long to read, but it is very important because they rebut the G7 point by point, paragraph by paragraph. Now, along with the whole issue of de-risking or decoupling, the other major points to cover now are the G7 accusing China of economic coercion, which is absolutely ludicrous and is psychological projection, which is exactly what the Chinese have said, that it's America, followed by the Europeans, who are sanctioning countries like all over the world. So to try and accuse the Chinese of economic coercion is ludicrous. And just last week, Schultz overrode his economic advisors and allowed the Chinese government to buy 25% of one of their major harbors. So if they're so terrified about Chinese coercion, why are they allowing them to buy a quarter share in a strategic location? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Makes
but
no sense.
It's the same man, literally less than 1 week later, now in Japan, dancing to the American tune. Meanwhile, Macron has literally done a backward somersault, and he's now attacking the Chinese. So that's very, very confusing, since he had doubled down on strategic independence and fought a political battle with all the Eastern European governments who were pissed off about him going weak on China whilst he was visiting President Xi. So that's literally like a 1-2 punch, then a run away. So we're seeing some very, very odd behavior. The Japanese are encouraging the Chinese to put pressure on the Russians over Ukraine, and they're also reinforcing their belief in the value of sanctions on Russia. But the hypocrite Japanese asked for a waiver that was granted to them previously so that they could keep on receiving 25% of their country's liquid natural gas imports from the Russians. So, it just, attacking the Chinese on these points is just like absolutely staggering. But as we saw in our last broadcast, there's loads more sanctions on raw materials. There's sanctions on diamonds. There's support for secondary sanctions, though, as forecast, they didn't go as far as implementing the Iraqi all for food style program. That was beyond the pale for the Italians, the French, and the Germans, because they don't literally want to just go back to the Dark Ages. Now, Prime Minister Modi seems to have had a very successful meeting, considering that he literally got a phone call, show up because Biden's not going to Australia, so we need to do the quad on the fly. He has been rewarded for that, but with the announcement that the next quad meeting will be held in India next year. And he's had a lot of bilateral meetings. He's really used his time very well. Now, on the other side of the coin, we've had Prime Minister Aboriginal from Australia, who also got told, get on your boat or your plane, whichever will go fastest, and get here fast because now Biden's not coming to Sydney. And he's basically, it's like he wasn't there, right? They did have the quad meeting. He was in the room, but in order to give him something to take home, much to the annoyance, I'm sure, of Mr. Kelly and all the One Nation people who produced those wonderful cartoons, he has now signed a new green environmental initiative with President Biden, which it looks like is going to accelerate turning off the lights in Australia. So everyone who's listening to this program better start investing in candles, since your alternatives are decades away from being ready. Now,
it's just madness,
Jason's going to research that. We'll try and cover that on the Monday morning show, whilst I split our labour and I do the research for what has occurred at the Russian Foreign and Defence Policy Council annual meeting. Now, the other important thing that we will get into, and I can post links to this, if people look at my Twitter feed, it's already there, is the World Health Assembly. That's the official annual meeting of the World Health Organization, the WHO meeting that all the countries go to. That starts on Sunday, European time, and it runs all the way through until the 30th of May. So we'll have to dip in and out of that as they have the meetings. The question is, will they try and jam through the 4th edition of the international health regulations? Now, they're going to be talking about the WHO pandemic treaty, but it's not going to get the final vote this year. They're still arguing over that, and the vote on that will be next year. But it does seem possible because they have to give, I think it's 6 months notice, might even be longer than that, for any new version of the international health regulations to go into effect. And so it seems that they want to give that notice at some point this year. So there's a heck of a lot going on this weekend. We hadn't even discussed the World Health Assembly in our previous shows. Now, the other thing that happened over the last couple of days, and I am on top of this, I have watched a couple of the key events and we'll discuss those tomorrow as well, is the Russia Islamic World Forum. This is the 14th annual version of that, that occurred in the capital of Tatarstan, which is one of the constituent parts of the Russian Federation. That occurred on the 17th, 18th, and 19th. Now, the important takeaway from that, without going into the details, which we'll discuss on next show, with some video clips, is the response on that to Zelensky going to the Arab League in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. So in much the same way that we've got Chinese responses to the G7, we had Russian and Tatarstan responses at this meeting that had all of the member states of the Organization of Islamic countries and 30 more that occurred on the same day. Okay, so when people look at the swing organizations, we're looking at the African Union, we're looking at the Arab League, and we're looking at what is called the OIC. Now, that's 58 countries, and it's very clear that Russia, as a long-standing observer nation of the OIC, is using its influence there to try and bring that entire block of countries into the Greater Eurasian Partnership in the new era. Okay? Yes. So just to keep this in perspective, I understand people saying, what the hell? I don't know what that stands for. Where do they meet? Who the hell are they? What countries are in it? Those are all legitimate questions. But I'm not only trying to explain the facts, but I'm trying to explain why as well, so that people can keep track of this kind of like tit for tat escalation that we're now in. So this is very much like Poland expels 8 Russian diplomats, and then Russia expels 8 Russian diplomats, and then Poland freezes the Russian embassy bank account, and then Russia freezes the Polish embassy bank account. It's this sequence of events that ends up with diplomatic relations being broken off, and then eventually one side or the other issues an ultimatum, and then we're a hair trigger away from a war. And in much the same way that when military conflict does start, you have what's called Khan's ladder of escalation. Now, Alex Jones has been very good on this. He's discussed it on his show, but it is actually a military/political theory document that has existed for a few decades, and it very much shows step by step how you go from a skirmish to a full-scale World War III nuclear conflagration. Now, it's been expanded many times. It's now over 50 steps, I believe. But, much like walking up a flight of steps, if you've got good leg strength, you can jump them 2 or 3 at a time. So you can't literally just go, tick, that one's going to happen next, tick, that one's going to happen next. You might have double or triple jumps. But when we have time on a less busy news day, then we'll get into that and show it to people. Fortunately, we're not at even the starting point of that yet, but it may not be far away. Now, we've got some Pakistan news, nothing particularly dramatic, but it looks like Imran Khan's going a little bit wobbly. I'd be happy to stand corrected on that, but we've had a series of statements that look odd in the circumstances. So while we'll have another look at that, what has turned out to be somewhat surprising, maybe surprising is not the right word, significant nonetheless turn of events, is 50 years ago, Iran and Afghanistan signed an agreement about the sharing of river resources. And that river has been dammed up, and notwithstanding the dam, the Afghans literally 50 years ago agreed that they would release so many million gallons per year. Okay? And they haven't been doing that. And the Iranians are getting more and more and more pissed off about that. They've now basically issued an ultimatum, and they have said that they haven't given sanctuary to 15,000 members of the Iranian army who fled when the Americans left them in the lurch from Afghanistan into Iran. Okay? And they have said flat out, if you don't give us our water, we're using these 15,000 guys to attack you. So that's a pretty big threat.
Absolutely.
Okay. And that's not really being covered by anybody because there's so much else going on. And I have to reiterate that, Jason and I are bringing you things that nobody else in the media is doing. So you've got, for example, Bloomberg, the big news service, and Reuters. Okay. They have said things like China pushes back on the G7, or China is very upset about the G7 joint communique. That, talk about understatement, right? They're not reproducing that paragraph in full. They're not explaining the circumstances, and they're not tying it back to President Xi's statement about opposing external forces and warning America not to try and do color revolutions in future. And what is happening the day after he gave them that warning, that was reiterated hours later by the foreign minister of China, Mr. Qin Gang, who didn't just say that America would be opposed by China, he said that China would resolutely oppose Chinese interference in the internal affairs of Central Asian nations. Resolutely oppose. This is what I'm talking about, escalation management. So it goes from oppose and don't try doing any more color revolutions to resolutely oppose, then the response to the G7 statement, and what is happening as we speak. There's another attempt, the second this year, at a color revolution in the Republic of Georgia. Now, just before we finish, we need to really quickly, as a marker, what precisely is the outcome of the C5. Now, I don't mean that in terms of, what's the text of each individual agreement that's been signed. If we have time, we'll start getting into some of those. But I really want to just have the audience consider these things. So, the C5 summit is over. It's an unqualified success. It's an enormous geopolitical, diplomatic, geographical, just huge win for the Chinese. Okay? Now, we have to look at this then from the American perspective. For them, it's the third loss in 3 months.
Yes.
You've had the Iran Saudi Arabia deal in China. Okay. You've had the Syrian readmission to the Arab League. Okay. And now you've got this absolute outright stuff the Americans, specifically because bear in mind that Blinken was there in March and Nuland was there a few weeks ago. So this is like crushing them personally, okay, and overturning 8 years of American policy. That this is basically like the Battle of Agincourt. This is ending an 8-year fight over who would gain the Central Asian states as their new sphere of influence. And there was a hell of a lot at stake, right? Because if the Americans had been successful, this was literally going to create a physical barrier. Literally, like, we can shut down the pipelines, we can shut down the railroads, we can shut down the toll booths, right? On the gas pipelines, the railways and the motorways, going from China to Russia. So if the Americans had been successful on this, this was a huge problem for Russia and for China. Okay, so they've defeated that. And when I explained to the audience that that is why the Russians and the Iranians cannot tolerate the Israelis being in Azerbaijan, they cannot tolerate that because of the control over the gas pipelines, and now that they're putting in the missing link of the railroads, that Israeli presence is it's gone from being a tolerable irritant to a intolerable irritant. So even though Russia has very much had a neutral policy with regards to Israel, because there are now 2 million dual citizen Israelis. 20% of the Israeli population has Russian citizenship. Okay, so that's why they've never really picked a side between the Israelis and the Syrians and the Israelis and the Iranians. But we're going to have to get into the details of Azeri politics at some point. I'm not saying, get out your Israeli dictionaries now and, I want you to tell me 2,000 words of Azeri by tomorrow. But I'm just flagging things to let the audience know that we are on top of these issues, and we're looking at these more than pretty much anyone else. Okay?
Yeah, well said, Simon.
Now,
I just want to put up something before I forget. It's really important. You appeared on TNT Radio yesterday, and I just want our audience to have a look if you want. You're on the Havoye Moritz show. I just want to bring that up there. I've put the link to the interview, or at least all of Havoye's interviews there in the comments for this. Simon, just quickly, you obviously the stuff that you talked about yesterday, this is even beyond that. This breaking news we've got now is even beyond.
These 3 points that I'm giving you now, our audience now, you're the first people to hear this. Okay, so you're not getting regurgitated information, right? You're getting it first, and you're getting it in much more detail, because we're not dealing with commercial breaks, and we're not dealing with other guests being booked for the following hour, and we're not dealing with appearances being scheduled 2 weeks in advance. Okay, I mean, poor Jason, his phone was probably going bing, 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 because I was like frantically trying to get him out of bed so that we could bring this information to you. So it's like as hot off the press as our technological and family requirements will allow. So let me just go quickly before we end this appearance onto the second of these 3 points. So Quinn, as we've explained, has detailed that the Chinese response will be resolute. Now, you've got to understand this guy's background and how his nickname is the Wolf Warrior. Now, I put out a tweet saying that this is the plot for movie Wolf Warrior 3, and I put the closing credits from Wolf Warrior 2. I'll put up a translation of those because they're hard to use a Google Translate, because it's a screenshot of a television image, but it's basically saying, fear not the people of China, China will always be with you. It's a very, very strong statement, and I appreciate it's from a movie, but it's the same as Braveheart or Patriot, which is obviously like the Scottish battle for independence from the British, and then the same actor, Mel Gibson, playing a key figure in the American War of Independence. So you can say it's a movie. Movies aren't real life, but don't forget, sometimes life imitates art.
Indeed it does.
Okay, so particularly when we're talking about propaganda and perception management and cognitive warfare, these kind of social media moments, when broadcast to 1 billion people, are extremely important. The Russians are crap at that, but the Chinese are very, very competent at that. So it's important to pay attention. And even if it doesn't pull at our kind of individualized Western heartstrings, then it certainly has an important impact upon hundreds of millions of Chinese people.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, we've obviously gone on to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement. That's the next step in the escalation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third point is, and this is very, very important. I believe that I'm the first person, other than the Chinese media, where I've got this point from, to bring this to audience attention. So literally, you should be making note of these 3 points, because this is the rest of the year laid out for you. Okay. Mm-hmm. So this third point is the Chinese media, in the run-up to the C5 summit, which happened on Thursday and Friday, Chinese time. Okay, everyone was saying, "What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen?" And they didn't leak. It was real, well embargoed story, right? But the one key point that not Bloomberg, not CNN, not ABC9, not the Sydney Morning Herald, none of the alt media, nobody, but Jason will confirm that I warned him, right? They were saying this is the first major diplomatic event of the year. Now, we've got obvious ones like the BRICS and like the AU-Russia summit and like the SCO head of government summit. Okay? Those are just three off the top of my head where you could say they're big events. But we have known all of those literally since last year because they're annual events. Okay? But they didn't say like the SCO, like the BRICS Plus. They're just saying this is the first major.
Might have had a dropout there in the audio, Simon, right in the middle of that conclusion. We'll just sit there for just another couple of seconds to see if it comes back. If not, we may have lost Simon.
Am I back with you now?
You've got you now.
Great. Okay.
Yep.
So
just repeat that last bit.
That was the globalists acting against us, but unsuccessfully on this occasion.
Well said.
So there you are. That's the thing to watch out. Now, to put this in context, the spokesman of the Iranian Foreign Ministry put out a quote very similar to this after the Iran-Saudi deal was announced. And I happened to be watching his Twitter feed at like 3 a.m, and he deleted it moments later. But he basically said that April and May will set the tone for the rest of the year.
Indeed. Yes.
And that appeared to be a mistake. He deleted that like 2 or 3 minutes later. Okay? So it just goes to show that these things are coordinated. And if you're paying very close attention, they give you glimpses of the future. And that is the niche that Jason and I are operating in. And that is the value of the information that we're bringing you.
Thanks, Simon. You've summed it up terrific. And the point is, for everyone watching, you can get on and watch your Sky News this morning and you'll see The Outsiders and various other programs, but you will not see the detail, certainly not on an international level, of the news that we're bringing here. This is definitely a grassroots attempt to put all this news together, but as you can see, the tentacles are going far and wide. The viewership is improving, the followers are improving, and we all appreciate it. It's very difficult to understand, but this is the point in all of it. In many ways, it's a televised university education that you can all participate in, into all becoming geopolitical scholars, as it were, as Simon brings the details to it. And I encourage all of you to listen to Simon's interview. I'm going to put that up again, Havoy and Morich's show, just to get a feel. Obviously, it's a different format being radio, but of course, with Faces for Radio, why wouldn't you want to be there for all of us there? A bit of a different take as well on in the format. Listen to it in the background and keep working on what's going on. We'll continue to bring more and more news to you as it comes. We're going to be back on in 24 hours time with a 1-hour wrap up and developments of what's going on at the various meetings around the world, and we will continue always to uncover what's going on in the great tensions. As you see, the US is and the West is in forms of decline. The US debt ceiling is another issue we haven't touched on yet. It's not seeming to go anywhere. Joe Biden lost his temper a little bit with an Australian journalist who asked him about it today, and his answer in typical Biden-esque fashion was shush up, okay? And then went on to talk about how these things always go the same way. One wonders what's going on with the US debt ceiling. Is this the final chance to bring down Biden, or do they top it up and buy him another 3 years or so, or whatever the time is going to be, and continue to kick the can down the road? Something tells me that something is up here as the Great Eurasian Partnership is pushing way ahead and leaving the West and the United States in the dust. The world is changing. The new era is certainly emerging upon us, and you watching this show are getting the very first reports in great detail using all news facts and, of course, a roadmap of the different meetings that are coming up that no one in the Western media, and certainly not here in Australia, is even aware of to actually broadcast real news. So I want to thank Simon again. Thank you all for watching, and please follow, please share, because the more shares, the more people see. And if we can get this from 15,000 to 50,000 views to 100,000 views, and before you know it, you're at 1 million, and it's really starting to make a difference. And that's because you understand what's going on and you can explain it. But the big deal is here that the US is and the West is collapsing as China is expanding in so many different ways. Go back and watch the other videos that you see on the different pages, whether it be Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or even Rumble, depending on what your favorite platform is. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you all tomorrow on the next show.